Good day to you. I'm Sister Sarah from the Moravian Historical Society in Nazareth, and today we're going to be making a kerchief that you can wear with your Moravian outfit or your 18th century colonial outfit. Kerchief is this part that goes around the neck. Basically, when we're talking about kerchiefs, we mean a big square of fabric. Typical measurements that are usually given in historical documents show 1 yard square. That might be a little big for you, so if you need to scale it down a little bit, you can. But the basic idea is you take your square, you fold it into a triangle, and then this is what goes around your neck. You can either tuck it in the front, you can tuck it in the back, you can leave it out, whatever you're most comfortable with. But the idea is a big square of fabric, and we put that into a triangle. We do have a couple other variations, though. If you're worried about all of that fabric bunching around your neck, you can just start with a triangle of fabric that's already cut into shape. We do see other variations that have places cut out for the neck. So it would be a triangle, but then it's got this little cutout here. So you can do a kerchief out of different weaves of fabric. If you're doing a regular colonial outfit, not Moravian, the style, the fashion is to have your kerchief match your cap, match your apron, if you're going with fancier fabric. When you're choosing fabric for your kerchief, you want to make sure you go with a natural fabric. Linens are the best, cotton is okay. Wool and silk were other fabrics that they had at the time. You don't want polyester, you don't want nylon, you don't want acrylic, you don't want some sort of modern fabric. You want something that they would have had at the time, so natural fabrics are the best. So when you have your square of fabric, or your triangle, or whatever shape it is that you're going with, you're just going to hem around the edge. So that we've got frayed edges right here. We don't want that, so we want to hem around the edge so that we keep all of that fray on the inside so your fabric doesn't unravel. That's why this is a really good first sewing project. If you've never done colonial costuming or historic costuming, if you've never sewed before, super easy project. It's a good way to get yourself started. If you want to, you can iron down your edges to start with. That'll give you... We're basically taking our raw edge, folding down once, and folding down again. And you can iron this down, you can pin this down, and that way the fabric won't move around on you as you're working. I'm going to be using a different color thread just so you can see what the stitches look like on the fabric. But of course, when you do this, you're going to want thread that matches your fabric. You also want to think about what your thread is made out of. If you're working with linen fabric, then technically you want to be sewing with linen thread. That might get a little expensive, so if you want to go with cotton thread, that's okay. But again, you probably don't want to go with polyester thread. It's up to you if you want to sew single thread or double thread. I like to sew double thread just because it is a little bit stronger. But if you're doing fine work like a kerchief, then single thread is fine. You can put a knot in the end, or if you want to do some back stitches to get started, you can do that also. Another thing that we can talk about is waxing your thread. This is just a piece of beeswax. If you've got an old Moravian Christmas candle lying around, that will work as well. But all you're going to do is pass the thread over the beeswax, and that way the thread picks up a little bit of the wax on it, makes the thread stronger, and it also allows it to pass through the fabric easier. So the first stitch we're going to take a look at is the running stitch. It looks like that. Easy stitch, probably the first stitch that people learn when they're learning hand sewing. This is the one where you just pass the needle up and down through the fabric. So putting the needle through and coming back up from the back side. If you want to do a couple stitches at a time, you can pass your needle back and forth through the fabric a few times, and that way you get a couple stitches at a time. Pull your needle through, a couple stitches. So once you're comfortable with the running stitch, then we can take a look at the back stitch, and that is, again, very simple. Just instead of all of your stitches going forward, once you've taken a couple stitches, instead of putting my next stitch over here, I'll just go back put the stitch behind the one where I was. And using a back stitch will give you a much stronger seam. If you want to do a combination of stitches, you can do a couple running stitches and then a back stitch and then a couple more running stitches and then a back stitch. That way you get a stronger seam, but you're not doing a back stitch every time, so it will save you some time. The next stitch we're going to look at is a whip stitch or a hemming stitch. And this one is just going from the edge of your hem into the fabric. So the needle's going to pass through the fabric, and then it's going to pass through the edge where we had folded it over or ironed it over or pinned it over. So one type of stitch that's seen a lot in fine work like this in kerchiefs is called a rolled hem. It's a little bit more tricky of a stitch, so if you're brand new to sewing, maybe try a couple other stitches first. But basically when we do a rolled hem, we're folding over teeny tiny bit of the edge of the fabric. You want a nice clean edge to start with. We're doing a stitch down on the fabric and then a stitch into the top of where we folded it down. And so you're going to get these kind of slanted stitches, but then once you've got a series of these, you can pull this and it will draw the edge of the fabric together. So it's basically folding that hem over for you as you pull the fabric, or as you pull the thread a little bit tighter. That way you don't need to worry about ironing any of your edges down or doing a hem that way. It gives you a very, very nice fine hem. And you see this a lot, especially on kerchiefs. So again, it's a stitch in the fabric and a stitch at the top of where you had folded over. And once you've got a couple of these, then you can pull it and roll your hem. As you go, you will see some stitches on the back, but of course you're using thread that matches your fabric, so your thread's not going to stand out against your fabric like mine is. So now that you've learned a couple stitches, you've got 4 edges of your fabric to practice out all of these stitches on. Again, we're talking about colonial 18th century clothing. They didn't have sewing machines back then, so really use this opportunity to practice your hand sewing, practice those stitches, perfect those. But then once you've gone around the edges and all of your raw edges are hemmed in, then your kerchief is done. You can just fold it and put it on, tuck it in, pin it in, and you've created your first clothing piece for your 18th century outfit. Congratulations, happy sewing!